I never really thought about money, what money was. I knew that I wanted a lot of money. I knew that I wanted to be rich as a young boy for a lot of reasons. And I knew that the pursuit of money could be best done through financial markets. It's something that clicked for me very early, that I realized that all the wealthy people that I would look up to were generally in the stock market. And so I spent the first third of my life, I guess, trying to learn about financial markets. And it got to the point where I had an encyclopedic knowledge of financial markets, specifically equities, stocks, and bonds as well. And it got to the point where I even knew how to play in that playground quite well. I would wake up every day at 5 in the morning. I would start reading the news. I'd start following certain names. I knew how to go long. I knew how to go short. I knew how to balance a portfolio. I knew how to use leverage. And I started actually generating profits. And I think it was when I started to want to use those profits to actually buy things, not just consume, but buy assets. And I wanted to buy a piece of real estate. I first started thinking about, so, okay, I know how to keep score in the stock market, but how do I translate this prosperity into assets? And why do these assets rise and fall? I knew why stocks, rose and declined because of the fundamentals, but it wasn't that simple to understand with an asset that doesn't produce income or with an asset that's tangible. And I think that's when I started really thinking about what money was. And the first thing I did was look up the definition of money and currency and things like Investopedia or Wikipedia. And I found that the definitions for money were very broad. And at that point, I started looking at, it became obvious to me. So first I realized that money wasn't the money that's being printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. That was just an order that was coming from another part of the government saying, print this many units of money in physical paper. I realized that money was actually controlled and printed by a central bank. And at first I thought, well, okay, the central bank is just commingling people's wealth and prosperity and ensuring the support structure for the rest of the banks. But then when I started reading into it and learning more about the different definitions, M1, M2, and M3, that's when things started breaking down for me. And it took many, many months for me to really realize that the money itself, the currency, wasn't backed by anything. It still didn't click. I would ask people questions and people would say to me, well, yeah, it's money. I'd say, well, okay, well, who does this? And ultimately, it would always end with the central bank. The central bank, it's just focus on the central bank. I said, okay, and how does the central bank make the money? Well, they just print it. Well, okay, so they just print the money, and are there rules for this? Of course, these are the smartest people in the world. These are all, Ivy League trained economists who spent their whole life. And again, where I was in my life at that point, when you hear those words and you hear authority and you're just assuming these are the smartest guys in the world. These people are looking out for all of us. They're thinking about this. But then I started looking at the history of money, and I found something very interesting. I found that for 2,500 years, money was always gold. And for the last 50 years, we've been tinkering with this new system. And at that point, it was still very difficult for me to understand why was gold money, because the people that I was spending time with were using very intelligent, or so I thought at the time, debates and reasoning for why gold should no longer be money. And one of them was that gold causes deflation. There isn't enough gold in the world. Gold is a barbarous relic. It's an antiquated currency. We move much faster now. The economy is much quicker. We have a much better quality of life now. And all those reasons at first seemed logical to me until I realized that all the economy was interlinked. And all the interlinks and chains in the economy ultimately reconciled not with any individual's view of the world, or economist's view of the world, or academic's view of the world, but with actually the natural systems. It was that moment when I realized that money had to be grounded in nature, in reality. It couldn't be something. It was so complex, just like weather patterns are complex, and physics is such a complex topic, and our existence and our consciousness. Money too had to be grounded in that same world. It couldn't be. We couldn't control each other with money. It had to be grounded in nature. And when I got to the nature part, I still wasn't convinced that gold was the right money. I thought, well, why can't you use diamonds, or why can't you use oil? And it was just brute force, trying every single form of money, learning about the physics, learning about the natural system, causalities, and eventually, after around 6 months of studying about gold and reading a lot of books, it clicked. It finally began to click that gold was money because it was immortal to time. And once that concept clicked for me, not just that it was immortal to time, but nothing else was immortal to time. So you can mine the gold once, and you can use it over and over and over again, and yet nothing else in the economy or in the natural systems could be used in that manner. So everything had a life cycle. And people then like to say, well, you can't use the gold, it's got no utility. But the point was that we as humans evolved by cooperating with each other in a market economy, and unleashed all this prosperity. And so we had to have a medium of exchange that would settle the debts and mathematical calculations between surpluses and deficiencies. And if we were going to do that, we had to use something grounded in reality. And the only thing we could use that was grounded in reality that would transcend time is gold. And even now it's complex. So hopefully Josh's explanation will be simpler. But it's really not that complex. You have to take a step back and stop thinking about the numbers on the pieces of paper or your bank account as numbers that ultimately some central bank controls. Start thinking about you with your own journey in life, the energy that you're expending, the laborious hours that you're putting into your career, and what you're getting in return. How are you measuring your own meritocratic journey against others? You need something to measure that. And if you use something like gold, you begin to be empowered because you're using something that's timeless. So you're not just measuring your own journey based on what the world is looking like today. You're measuring your own journey based on what the world looked like 6,000 years ago and what it's going to look like 6,000 years from now.